Hi, my name is Lee Cornish, and today I will be discussing the smallpox virus. Smallpox was an infectious, deadly disease caused by the Variola virus. This is a non-airborne disease that can only be spread by human-to-human contact. So when you first get the disease, there's a 7 to 19 day incubation period of the disease where patients feel no pain and the symptoms do not present themselves yet. So when the symptoms do start to present themselves, what you will have are high fevers, head and body aches, and sometimes nausea. So then comes the rash, which is the most predominant feature of the smallpox virus. It is the sores that accumulate all over your body in sometimes very dense clusters. These sores will have pus and other fluids inside of them. So this spreads to all parts of the body within 24 hours, so it's very fast. And then as your sores scab over, your fever may rise. So then the pustular rash and scabs crust over and then eventually will disappear in about 3 weeks if you survive the disease. This leaves scars all over your body, just everywhere, and it will be blatantly obvious with little dots and imprints from the scars that if you've ever had it. What actually kills you with the smallpox virus is not just the fever, but it weakens your immune system so much that you become very susceptible to any other virus or disease. So, a brief history of smallpox is that it was originated in Africa somewhere between possibly 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. This number varies because there was no accurate record keeping back then, so the number varies quite a bit. But we do know that at least 2,000 to 4,000 years ago in Egypt, it was very predominant because we do have mummies that have had the scarring from smallpox on their bodies. So we know that it was there at least 4,000 years ago. So from Africa, smallpox traveled to Europe and Asia through trade and the migration of humans. Whenever it first reached a new population, there was always a sharp increase in the amount of disease since no one had ever experienced this before. This is especially prevalent in the New World when in the 1950s smallpox was introduced to Native American, Central American peoples, which this just completely decimated whole populations of people. The Native Americans in South, Central, and North America had no immunity to this, and it was quite devastating for their populations. So, about 200 years later, in the early 1970s, variolations for smallpox started to become prevalent in Europe. Now, variolations was a way of giving an immunity to smallpox. It was done by obtaining the smallpox scabs, which I discussed earlier, and crushing them up into a very fine powder. So this powder was then inhaled through the nose, causing one to have a very mild case of the disease, which had a much lower mortality rate than getting smallpox naturally. By the way, the mortality rate of smallpox in the European population was anywhere from 20 to 60% in adults and 90% in children at this time. So there was a very high chance that if you got smallpox, you would not make it. So once the method of variolation was shown to have consistently lower mortality rates than just having natural treatments, it was introduced to the royal families and the upper classes. The middle class also got it, but the lower classes of society who did not have the resources, or people just did not care about them as much, got them last, or just if they had extra. So it was a very hot commodity at the time. So, but then came along Edward Jenner. Now, Edward Jenner was a scientist and he was the creator of the smallpox vaccine in 1796. Jenner discovered the vaccine for smallpox because he observed that milkmaids who had gotten cowpox were immune to catching smallpox. This was because when they got cowpox, it was a much less deadly disease than smallpox, but because the two diseases are very closely related, when you had smallpox and you had the antibodies in your system, they would also protect you against smallpox. This took months and months of observations and just trying to find the actual vaccine and what the reason was for milkmaids not getting smallpox. So he put a lot of effort into that, and really it was miraculous that he could do this. And then came the eradication of the smallpox vaccine. So once Edward Jenner really solidified his idea of this vaccine by giving cowpox to everyone, it started to spread like wildfire across Europe. Because everyone wanted to have the cure for it, because since it was such a deadly disease, killing so many people. Also, they were sick of having virulations, because yes, that was less deadly than getting the disease naturally. It was still quite hazardous to have yourself. So, in Europe, the vaccine swept the nation, covering a large portion of the continent, and by 1800, his works were published in every major European language. So this allowed your everyday doctors from all over the place to be able to recreate this in their own towns rather than having to have Edward Jenner come in and do it himself. So that was very helpful. So once Europe was very vaccinated for it, they wanted to get this vaccine to the New World of North, Central, and South America. Though there was a problem with this because that vaccine could not be easily transported. So Francisco Balmas had the solution. He planned to use 22 orphans aged 8 to 10 to transport the virus across the Atlantic Ocean. This was needed because there was no good way of storing a live virus for long journeys, and if he just infected one orphan at a time, he would have a very long window to cross the Atlantic with, just in case they got lost or put off course. So King Charles of Spain in 1803 decided that this was a pretty good idea, and he sent Balmas on his way. And the Balmas expedition was a huge success, bringing the various parts of America this precious vaccine that was saving thousands of lives in Europe and all over the world. So later, after the Americas, it was even brought to Asia and the Philippines, where that slowly spread over there, and it was very good. So to add on to the eradication after the vaccine, many governments implemented compulsory vaccines, and by the 1850s it was almost completely eradicated. To help with the worldwide eradication in the later 1900s, the World Health Organization supplemented funds and personnel to the effort. The first continent to eradicate smallpox completely was North America in 1952, then came Europe, South America, Asia, and finally Africa in 1977. Though smallpox is eradicated, there's always chances of it still being out there. Either someone is a carrier and they just have not transmitted to anyone yet, but it's also kept in secure laboratories for scientific research. But even in the highest security of laboratories, accidents can still occur, and in 1978, a woman working in a UK laboratory accidentally came in contact with the virus and then died. So she was the last known death of smallpox. So you may not get a smallpox virus. It hasn't really been given out since the mid-1970s in America, but I'm sure that your parents or grandparents did get this vaccine. Now, you may still get it if you travel to a developing world or if you join the armed forces and plan on traveling overseas. And just in case there ever is another outbreak, many governments stockpile large quantities of the smallpox virus. So, smallpox killed scores of people for hundreds of thousands of years, thousands of years. Hopefully humanity will never have to deal with it again. Thank you for your time.